The gentleman I have the great honor of introducing to you today is a true legend within modern music and considered by millions of people to be the finest musician of modern music. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John McLaughlin. John.
What an introduction. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, John, and thank you so much for making this happen. And can you please tell me how this musical journey started?
It began, I would say, about when I was 5 years old. And my mother was an amateur musician, a violinist, and she encouraged me to listen to music from a very early age. And already when I was very young, I started to have these kind of experiences listening to music, you know, where you kind of get shivers and your hair curls, you know. And I think this is really what marked me to become a musician. Eventually I asked her if I could take piano lessons. We had a piano in the house, and she also showed me violin, but I was not really taken by violin. I loved the violin, and it became a critical component in a number of groups subsequently. But I asked her if I could study the piano, which I did, and so I was studying, you know, the Western classical, Beethoven and Mozart, and it was marvelous until I was 11 years old, and the guitar came in, thanks to my elder brothers.
Was it hard to sort of go from piano and violin into guitar, or was it for you?
No, it was the easiest thing in the world, because I fell in love with the guitar. The minute it arrived in my hands, I was made for the guitar. When I was 11 years old, I went to bed with the guitar that night. That's how much I love the guitar.
Oh, fantastic!
And to this day, it's still a love affair with the guitar.
Because also I understand your quote that you feel sort of naked without the guitar, and it's a part of your body.
Not naked, but I always like to be near a guitar, near my instrument. It's my instrument, and she's a marvelous instrument, and I love it dearly. And so it's not really a question of work. Musicians, they're kind of born, you know, if you have that love and that passion for it, then it's easy. No, it's not easy. It's never easy. But it's not work, as we consider work. We have a strange idea about work in the West, that work is something to be done and then at 5 o'clock forgotten all about, because we're going to now live. And a musician, true musician, doesn't feel like that. A musician doesn't have weekends or days off. Another day is the day of self-discovery and of discovery in the music. And it's marvelous. It's a very privileged life, actually.
Oh yeah.
But on condition that you have this kind of mad passion, you have to be crazy, really, to have this kind of passion that just compels you and obsesses you to learn and absorb.
But we love it. I mean, your fans out there, your music, it belongs also in our hearts.
I'm still learning every day, you know, and I think this is from what I've seen of the great teachers I've had the pleasure to study under. They, in addition to being teachers, they're perpetual students. That they are learning every day. And even at my tender age, I learn every day. Because life is continuous, and your life is, I'm different today than I was yesterday. And so the music will be slightly different. Okay, one day, 24 hours, it's not much, but in 6 months you can really notice a difference. It happens to me, I see it. And I see, of course, going back in my past recordings, and I see. But at the same time, there's something that's perpetually the same. In a way, maybe I'm just an old hippie, and I'm still 29. Only my body doesn't agree with me. But until now, my hands are good, and my health is good. And until such time as I cannot physically, because there will be a time when the body says, sorry, that's it, I'm out, time out, like permanently, then it'll be time out. But I won't have any regrets. I don't think so, because I've had such a fantastic life.
Oh yes. Every boy has a dream. What was yours?
To be a musician.
Yeah. And
Very simple.
yeah,
Life was very simple for me.
it was no alternative.
No, not as far as my desire was concerned.
Mm.
What do I want to be?
Yeah.
I only ever wanted to be a musician.
Yeah. And you have such a variety of and a profound style, which both includes rock, fusion, jazz, several elements of jazz, and flamenco, and to me the most extreme and beautiful and clearest techniques I've heard. And what motivates you to go from one extreme to the other? And
What are the extremes?
I mean, from one style, from one extreme style to the other. You have not stayed in just one genre, but sort of influenced so many. And how is that possible?
How is it possible? It's because I love them. I love music. I've always, music is what I was saying before, music is everything to me. Music is such a beautiful, marvelous power and a beautiful thing that connects us all together. And it's like a beautiful jewel, isn't it?
Mm.
But it shines through different facets, and because you go into Romania and you have marvelous musicians, you go into India, have fantastic musicians, you go into the Aborigines at the other side of the planet, and it's all music, and it's all part of that magnificent jewel that is the music of humanity. And for me, there's no such thing as bad music. There's music that can be badly played, or that is shallow in feeling. There's no real depth to it. But all music is good, and there's room for everything. All music is good. What fascinates me, and what has always fascinated me, are the cultural expressions, the so marvelous and beautiful cultural expressions of music that have fascinated me since the very beginning. I mean, I love classical music. I am actually a Western musician. My discipline began as classical piano and became, as discipline, a jazz discipline. To master an instrument, you need a discipline.
Mm.
Or you have a classical discipline, or you have a jazz discipline. And in those days, in any way, we're going back quite a few years here, and since I got caught by the jazz discipline, this is the one that I felt actually is the one that captured my heart. But let me go back very briefly, because you really need to understand what I was exposed to as a young teenager. Directly the time the guitar came into my hands, having spent all my life to that point listening and playing classical music, Western classical music. My brother, all elder brothers, with two of them going to university, and brought into home what was known as the blues boom began in 1952 in the UK. So by 1953, when I was 11 years old, they came home with these fantastic blues records, and at the same time as I had the guitar. So immediately there's this connection between this instrument, even though I've grown up classical music, and I'm listening to these Mississippi blues players, and it was a revelation to me. It was absolutely phenomenal.
Mm.
It just blew my mind, and I adored this music from the very first moment. And then, but thanks to my older brothers, within the next 5 years, I was exposed systematically to Indian music, which marked me also forever. Flamenco music, very powerfully, to the point where I would skip school the end of every month and hitchhike down to Manchester. I was living in a small town north in England, and I had a brother at Manchester University, and I would hitchhike down to his, stay with him overnight, because he would sneak me into a pub illegally, of course, underage, but there was a real flamenco player called Pepe Martinez, and so I was exposed to live flamenco music, and actually I wanted to be a flamenco guitar player, but in the little town where I lived they'd never even heard of flamenco. They didn't know what flamenco was, and then very shortly after that, within a year after trying to learn flamenco from recordings, it was very difficult. You needed a teacher in flamenco. I heard Miles Davis, and really that was the end of my search for a particular discipline, because this was the school. The music of Miles captured me, and all of the people around him, Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley and Bill Evans, these great icons who are actually they are still today all my heroes, and I adore them to this day. I listen to them to this day, because they helped me so much in my life, musically. And then personally, of course, when I got to play with Miles. So if you take these 5 years, they really impacted on me so strongly that these influences manifested themselves subsequently as I grew older as a human being and grew as a musician, to the point where you can see in the different aspects of my career how these influences manifested themselves.
Oh yeah, and with Miles, I heard that he called you his favorite guitar player, and you were with him for at least five of his most important recordings.
Well, on and off between 69 and 91 until the final concert. I played with him in July 91, and he was 2 months later, he passed on. On and off, of course, but during that time, he was like a guru to me. He helped me. On my arrival in New York, from the moment I arrived in New York, which I was not there to join Miles, I was there to join his drummer, Tony Williams, who I was thrilled to join, because I've been listening to Tony since 1965, from one of Miles's Live in Europe record, and he was 18 years old at the time, and probably the greatest revolutionary drummer of the latter part of the 20th century. So I was thrilled to be invited by him to go and join him in a trio with Larry Young, Khalid Yassin, the Hammond organ player. But as it just happened, you see, destiny is very mysterious. I met Miles the same day, and also the next day, and that was when he invited me to go and record with him. And miraculously, I passed the acid test, and I got very close to him. He helped me so much. I will never be able to pay the debt, really.
And speaking of gurus, I just want to bring it straight forward, and you are my absolute number one guitarist, and I've heard them all, and John, I've read so many things from so many guitar players, from Jeff Beck, Santana, from Frank Zappa, saying you play faster than a machine gun with a delicate sound. Yes, I still get the goosebumps when I close my eyes. Coming home, putting on one of your songs, Feelings, and you also taught Jimmy Page several lessons, and I must say, when because I like your motto. I've never, not motto, but your when you said that the guitar is part of your body, and that is truly what I mean. With you, yes, it is one and the same person.
Yeah, the guitar is me, and I am the guitar. When we play, there's no separation. At least there shouldn't be, except on a bad day, and we all have bad days when we fight. But the fight itself is beautiful too. All musicians that I know, we've all had gigs and we've gone to the hotel suicidal, but it's all relative, isn't it? Because you have a great night where you experience true liberation in music, and that becomes the norm. And that's what we want, except you can't control that. You cannot control the experience of liberation. That will come or it won't. You just prepare yourself. You have to be prepared. And if you're not, and when I mean prepared, it means everything else has to be your work, your technique, everything fine. But everybody has bad night. I'll never forget the very first time I played a live concert with Miles, and it was probably the greatest, my greatest lesson of humility, because we were in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we played the first set. I had another acid test on the opening piece, but miraculously I passed it, and we played the set. We finished the set, and we didn't have a dressing room. It was in the gymnasium in the university, and we had a locker room, and I was just absolute heaven. And I was sitting on the bench, just a wooden bench, with the lockers around, and just absolutely thrilled. Here I was playing with Miles, and it was just so marvelous. And he came and sat next to me, and he turned around, and he kind of whispered to me, "I didn't play shit," And I thought, oh man, how can you say that? He just played like a god, But he knew, because he was extremely intelligent, he was a great artist, not just a great musician. He knew how much I revered him. And he was very sensitive to that, to how much I revered him. And so, in a way, when I try to look back and think back on it, I think he felt he didn't much up to the point where on the pedestal that I put him, because he was on a pedestal. He was my hero. I revered him, and I had the feeling that he felt himself he didn't play as well as he should have in front of me, and that was the greatest humility lesson of my life.
John, I had to ask
Yes.
you, what is your motto?
What is my motto?
Yeah.
My motto? Be here now.
Perfect.
That's the only moment we have, is this one. So, live this moment.
Yes, I agree. Is there a bond or limit between human imagination and what is possible to ignite or take out from the guitar when playing? Are there any limits?
The only limits are the limits that we impose on ourselves, or the limits of our imagination. And I am convinced that the imagination is infinite. in its capacity. I don't believe that we are anywhere near. I don't really think there's an end, because how can there be an end in music? How can we get to the end of music? I mean, you get to the end of life. So it's infinite in every possible way, isn't it?
It is.
So how can we get, if life is infinite, we cannot get to the end of life unless you die. But that's just a transition point, isn't it? You haven't reached the end of life. There's no such thing as the end of life. So you're talking about the end of the universe. All right, yeah, when the big collapse happens, but then maybe that's just the beginning of a new Big Bang, isn't it? You know, when it all start over. So I don't believe that there are limits unless they are self-imposed. And I'll tell you one other thing, that recently in Bangkok I was invited to be on the jury of a guitar competition, and just guitar players from all over Thailand, and the level was so high, it was phenomenal. And all of them, they are developing new techniques. And at the end, there were nine of them, and eventually out of the jury, there were 5 people on the jury. We had to eliminate 7, which was very difficult because the level was so high. And the last 2, one was, it was more like about 27, 28, had definitely more experience. The other was a young man of 19 years old. And and they had to jam together. And it was so amazing. I was on my feet shouting. That's how amazing it was. And in the end, whereas before I thought the older young man would win, no, it was the young one for me who won. And in the end, it was my vote who swung the vote in his favor. And they are developing new techniques. He's developing new techniques that I have no idea what he's doing. It's amazing what they're actually doing on guitar. And so, how can we say there's a limit to music?
I agree.
It's not possible. It's not possible. Because then in another 20, 30 years, they will be a little bit older generation. There will be a younger generation coming out. Of course, it's a technique that for me is based on the beginnings of people like Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen, or Alan Holdsworth, where they do a lot of this full on, but they've taken it to an unbelievable degree, playing with 2 hands. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. So, there's no limit.
No.
There's no limit.
I agree.
Actually, I was very impressed with this young man. His name is Toy, the winner. And and so I was speaking to him through an interpreter because his English wasn't bad. And you know what? He doesn't have a guitar. He doesn't own a guitar because his mother wants him to be a singer.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, how did he get to be so great? It's because every day he goes over and he borrows a guitar from his friend. So I actually organized that he would have a guitar. He now has a Fender Stratocaster.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because he's marvelous. He's a marvelous young talent. And he's playing my instrument.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah.
It's great, isn't it?
Fantastic. When I listen to you playing progressive rock from your days around Jimi Hendrix to the fantastic variations of jazz styles with Miles Davis, or to the fantastic, to use the word, guitar trio with Paco de Lucia, Aldi Mola, and yourself, and further to Mahavishnu and Shakti. They all represent different variations, genres in styles. And what defines a genre? And is it possible, and is it difficult crossing the different genres?
No, it's what I said before. If you love it, then it's yours. If you love particular music, it's yours. You don't have to. You adopt it, like adopt a baby child. It's yours. It becomes yours. That doesn't mean to say you can just say to some Indian musician or some flamenco musician or whatever, let's just jam. No. You need to respect their culture and their traditions. And the only way you can do that is through learning their techniques and culture and traditions. And but for me, this was a given. And so already by the end of the 1960s, I was taking flute lessons, Hindustani, North Indian flute lessons, simply because I love flute. And I love flute players. The majority, apart from James Galway, who was probably one of the greatest Western flute players, I have a great admiration for the Indian flute players, the bamboo flute players, whether they are North Indian or South Indian. And and so by already I'm studying Hindustani music because I want to learn these traditions. Why? Because I have a desire to play with these people, because they're marvelous players. I mean, especially when I hear flamenco music or I hear Indian music. Indian music, let's just take Indian music. They are masterly improvisers. They improvise in rhythm, and they improvise in ragas, which are very similar to the school that captured me, which is the Miles Davis school, the modal school of jazz, which he created in the end of the 1950s. Which what caught me, and so I've been studying this way of playing. It's much more linear as opposed to the Charlie Parker bebop school. Not that you should ignore that school. Any jazz musician has to know his harmony, has to know his rhythm, and has to know his melody. They are all integral parts of it. But the common ground between Indian music and jazz music is evident. Coltrane already showed that when he integrated the spiritual dimension into jazz music with the Love Supreme. Prior to that, the only so-called spiritual music was in the masses of the composers. And it's no coincidence that Coltrane's son was named Ravi, after the great Pandit Ravi Shankar, with whom I had the great fortune of studying under also in 1974-75. So these experiences and having the opportunity to study with great masters allowed me, through the techniques, to find my way. Of course, I love their music, so this is the main bridge. But you need the technical means and you need the intellectual means in order to approach these players. You understand?
Of course. And
it's just out of respect, really.
How much would you say that your experience with that fantastic culture, how much would you say that has made a huge impact or influenced your style?
It continues to influence my style today, because it's part of my life. India is part of a very important part of my life, interior and exterior. I mean, exterior means in my art. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am without India and without the impact of the Indian culture on my life. The philosophy, the music, everything. But then I wouldn't be who I am without the impact of the Hispanic influence. But already the Hispanic influence, I could hear, because you listen to the early 20th century classical composers, particularly in the Impressionist school, and they adored the Hispanic influence. People like Ravel and Debussy. You listen to these early Impressionist the French school, basically, of the earlier 20th century, and you'll hear that was part of them. Listen to there's a recording Miles made in 1958 called Miles Ahead with the Gil Evans Big Band. On that, this was one of the pieces that just blew me away. It's called Blues for Pablo, and in it Miles shows and expresses his profound affection for Hispanic traditions, because not only is he playing the blues, like he always did, Miles never left the blues, even with his phenomenal techniques, you hear how much he adored the Hispanic influence and this element of flamenco. And since I had already become under the spell of flamenco, for me to hear Miles with this flamenco influence just consolidated everything that I felt about my direction. You know, it was perfect.
How much would you say, John, is talent, and how much would you say is practice?
I think you know what they say, that the genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. I don't know if I agree with that equation, but I think they're viewing it from the point of view of like the worker optic.
Yeah.
You know, because I can't. The millions of hours I spent in my life playing guitar, if there are millions of hours in a life, but however many they are, that's a huge proportion of my life. So of course it's so, but I don't really stop to think about what I'm doing. All I want to do is be up to date with what's going on in my imagination. That's all. And what I did yesterday, that's gone. Tomorrow, anyway, doesn't exist. So I just want to take care of today and be up to date, because we're changing every day. That's what I said before.
And we have touched on it, John, but about inspirations. But again, you have inspired books of guitarists, musicians, fans out there, page by page. And I gotta say, who was probably your greatest influencer?
Well, I think I've mentioned a few. I mean, if we go back to whether it's Muddy Waters, when I was 11 years old, Big Bill Broonzy, Lead Belly, you know, and subsequently Son House, Robert Johnson, the great Mississippi blues players, the harp players, and then of course flamenco, whether it's Sabicas or Ramon Montoya or Pepe Martinez, whom I used to go to see and hitchhike down to in Manchester. And then, of course, you know, Django Reinhardt, phenomenal to this day. Phenomenal player. And on two fingers. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's genius to me. And then, of course, it's, you know, I moved from all of that arrived when I heard Miles. Even before the great, I heard him play with Charlie, recording with Charlie Parker. He must have been 18 or 19. But by 1958, he was the man. And he had a new concept of jazz, and it was the concept and the playing. But he had such an impact on Coltrane. I remember there's an interview on a recording of Miles in Sweden, where he's playing with the Coltrane, and Coltrane does a radio interview, and it's on the record. Actually, the interview was very silly, but anyway, Coltrane just talks briefly about Miles, and he's so happy and grateful to what Miles has given him. He's given him the exposure, and he gave him the concept too. Because prior to Miles, Coltrane was playing like Dexter Gordon, a great saxophone player with whom I played in a movie in Paris about 20 odd years ago. Great player, but Dexter was Dexter. And then from the impact of Miles on Coltrane, transformed also Coltrane, like Miles transformed, I think, every musician he's ever had. He certainly transformed me, but I think he transformed all his boys. You know, I think all the people who I feel a very family contact with all of the people who play with Miles. I feel a family contact with all musicians because we're all one family. Anyway, we're all one family. But musicians are another kind of family. But the family of the musicians who play with Miles, we all have him in a way in common, and he had such an impact on all of our lives that we're marked forever. You know, I mean, it's just we're marked. That's it. And he marked us all.
I agree.
With his genius, you know, simple as that.
Oh yeah. John, you're speaking of people who've had a great influence on your style and life, but you've also had yourself an amazing influence on others through your art and music. We've touched on it, but from giving guitar lessons to Jimmy Page but also bringing the beautiful Indian music, bringing that forward into the jazz and Western music arena. I think that is amazing. And can you please tell me more about that? And did you ever work with George Harrison on this area?
No. I met George. He was very dear to me. He was always dear to me in the Beatles because we were all part of the same generation, you know, and into psychedelics and then into Eastern philosophy, looking for the answers to the great existential questions, and he was a true seeker. And of course, I had the great fortune to study with his guru, Pandit Ravi Shankar. In fact, there's a piece on Black Light album that's that's a dedication to Pandit. Only nobody called him Pandit. Everybody called him Pandit G, because G is a token of reverence and affection, and like maestro, but more effective. No, it was by 1972. I knew Zakir Hussain, who was probably today's greatest tabla player, a true maestro of the tabla, the son of the great Alaraka, who was, of course, the accompanist of Pandit Ravi Shankar throughout most of his life. And the training I learned in the late 60s on learning Hindustani flute, and then I was studying South Indian Veena with my guru Dr. Ramanathan at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And so that's about 4 years of studying North and South Indian music, and by which time I had met a number of Indian musicians. And at this point, these musicians, I speak about Zakir Hussain, but the other one, violinist was Dr. Shankar, L. Shankar. And these were my generation musicians, fascinated by the West as much as I was by the East. And they were looking for the opportunity to find musicians who could make that bridge, you know, who loved their music and who were willing. And so it was really just marvelous, happy coincidence that Zaku and I, we began playing together in already 1972, and I was already studying with Dr. Ramanathan, and by 1973 I was friends with Dr. Shankar, and we began jamming together. And around that time, mid-73, I said, I have to bring all of this together into one unit. And I got Dr. Shankar and Zakir Hussain, and I invited the percussion player of my guru, who was Ranman Raghavan, the Mridangam player, a South Indian drum. So there was a combination of North Indian tabla, South Indian Mridangam, South Indian violin, and Western guitar. And this was Shakti. So we began around 1973. And I had, at this time, the Mahavishnu Orchestra also. And so we were doing big concerts with the Mahavishnu Orchestra and small concerts with Shakti, because Shakti was something that I loved. And musically had tremendous gravity for me, was pulling me musically. And spiritually also, in a certain sense. To the point that by the end of 1975, I folded the Mahavishnu Orchestra and told everyone that my main group would be Shakti, to the not anger but to the disappointment of a lot of people, including my record company and my agent, who thought I was quite mad to sit on the carpet, play with these Indians.
Yes.
But my attitude was, listen, musically I have to do this, and just I will assume the consequences.
Oh, yes.
I understand I will lose listeners, of course, I will lose listeners, I know it, but I have to be true to myself, as the old bard would say.
Of course.
And so we lost listeners, but we gained some. And over the years, I mean, Shakti has really been an icon of meeting between East and West, and North and South India too.
Beautiful, John. I have to say, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a marvelous group.
Yeah.
I mean, we lost Srinivas last year, which we haven't got over yet. I haven't got over losing him, because he's the mandolin player, and a true prodigy. He was touring India, playing classical concerts at 7 years old on a mandolin. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. One of the most beautiful souls I've ever met. And he passed away last year with liver failure at 45 years old. So we don't really know what to do yet. Maybe time will heal, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult just to think of trying to find somebody to replace him, because he's irreplaceable. This is the problem. In any event, but it has a fantastic history, dating back to, when the first recording, public recording, was done in 1975. So this is 40 years now, 85, 95, 40 years. It's enough to make you feel old, isn't it? But it established a number of things which in the East and the West, and we have had over the years nothing but thanks from many people that we pulled it together.
Can I ask, John, what does Shakti mean?
It's the feminine aspect, actually. It's the feminine aspect.
How?
If you look at if the Indian, take the Hindu pantheon, which is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is what they call the creator. Vishnu is the sustainer. We're talking about the universe, because God, the infinite one, is indescribable. So the Indians, in their infinite wisdom, they divide the supreme invisible Godhead into three aspects: the creator of the universe, what you might call the Big Bang; the sustainer of the universe, because it's sustained; and the transformer is because the universe is moving constantly, it's transforming. And these aspects are given different Godheads: Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And Shakti is the feminine consort, in a way, of Shiva. So, but represents beauty, power.
Oh, fantastic!
What the real aspects of music are, really, aren't they? They touch everybody.
And yes, indeed, and so does your band, Mahavishnu Orchestra, like we touched on, and from your one of the albums, the most, it's just stunning, The Inner Melting Flame. And I remember when, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I see I put a lot of thoughts into this. I was thinking, why would you sort of, that is not my Christian, but why would you put down that band? Listening to, for instance, which I think is the way that song is played, performed, written, and how the sweet elements come together, and the pin as the song goes with a powerful guitar. It's just
dynamics, yeah.
Fantastic, and or the song.
So what's the question?
So my question is, of course, that song must have influenced so many bands, because when I listen to those songs, I go, oh yeah, there you go, Led Zeppelin, or there you go, Deep Purple. If you see what I mean, it must have been made a huge impact on the.
Well, they're all friends of mine, those people too.
Yes.
I mean, of course, Jimmy and John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones and I, we were in a couple of rhythm and blues bands together in the '60s. So he's a very dear old friend, and of course. Deep Purple. I never got to meet Richie Blackmore, who's there, but of course Steve Morse, who's been with them for so many years. He's a very, very dear friend, a great guitar player too. The Mahavishnu Orchestra. This was a number of influences coming together, but I have to say that we have to look at the 2 years prior to the creation of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, because I arrived in New York in early January '69 to play with Tony Williams, as I explained, and Khalid Yassin, Larry Young, the organ player. And it just so happened that I started working with Miles and recording with Miles at the same time. So I was doing two jobs in a way. Whenever I wasn't playing with Tony, I was playing with Miles, and I was recording with Miles, and of course I was recording with Tony. And I had two different jobs in a way. With Lifetime, with Tony, he really liked the music that I wrote, and so he constantly encouraged me to write music. And so I would say that a great deal of pre-work of Mahavishnu music was done in the years '69, '70 with Tony Williams and Lifetime. And don't forget, there was the year 1970, Jack Bruce joined us, who was my old comrade from Ginger Baker days and Graham Bond days. The violin, the counter instrument to the guitar, I wanted a violin. Is because my mother played violin? Probably. But I didn't want a jazz player. I wanted an R&B violinist, and which might sound strange, but I felt that's where my instincts led me. And then eventually I found Jerry Goodman playing in a band outside of Chicago called The Flock. That was, I mean, pretty unknown. But I heard him play, and I said, this guy is definitely for the band. And Billy Cobham, I met on the Jack Johnson recordings with Miles, which was a marvelous experience, very particular with Miles especially. In any event, after that recording, Billy and I became very dear friends. Don't forget, by this time, by 1971, around 1970, around this time, October, November 1970, I was already under the influence of Indian music. I was studying Indian music, and it was having an impact on me, especially with its rhythms and its compound rhythmical cycles. And I was finishing a concert near Boston with Miles, and all the musicians had gone home except Miles and myself, and we were just in the band room just chatting. And out of the blue, he turns around and he said, "It's time you formed your own band." And I said, "What? What is he saying?" Because, but I took it very seriously because he was the most honest man I had ever met. He was well, this little anecdote that I told you about his being honest with me about not playing, not being up to standard, just because he was brutally honest with himself. He was brutally honest with everybody, but you always knew where you were with Miles. It was great. It's wonderful to have this kind of honesty, and so I couldn't really figure it out, but I took him very seriously, and as if he says it, that means I have to do it. And by this time I'd known Billy, and just so happened at this very time I'd known Miroslav Vitus for a number of years. From you will remember Miroslav Vitus, the great bass player, and he called me up one day. This is about 2 months after Miles had given me this order, put your own band together, and Miroslav, whom I'd been friends with for years, he was a very dear friend, he said, "Listen, John, we're putting a band together with Wayne and Joe Zawinul. It's going to be called Weather Report, and we want you to be in it." And I said, "I would love to be in it, but I've got to do my own thing. Miles has told me to put my band together, so I have to do it. And thank you, I would love to do it, but I have to do this." Because he's got faith in me, so I've got to justify that faith. So he said, "Well, that's great, okay. Well, listen, if you need a piano player," he said, because he's Czech, from Prague. He said, "If you need a piano player," he said, "you heard it, you don't know Jan Hammer, but he's out in California playing piano with Sarah Vaughan. He's really good." I said, "Well, if he's playing with Sarah Vaughan, he's really good." And so he gave me his number, and I called him, and he was ready. He was ready to move out of that classical jazz into new music.
Wow.
And really that's how the band came about. And of course, by this time I'd written a lot of music because of the 2 years I'd been with Tony. And Miles, I said there were two different kind of jobs. Miles, all he wanted were things from my R&B days, like what kind of, he'd play a chord, "What do you hear?" Because I'd be there with the guitar every day. He'd be around the house so many times whenever I was home, and so I say, "Well, do you like this? This is some of the wakachoo, wow, wakachoo, 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 wakachoo." I say, "I like that," And so and so by the time we went into Bitches Brew, I knew Miles. I knew him very well, and it was a fantastic experience. Because I introduced him to Badal Roy, who was the tabla player, and Bala Krishna, who was the sitar player, all of whom participated. Because Miles was ready to break out of this fantastic concept that he had, but after 10 years, by 1969, that was 10 years he'd been doing that, and the band was moving out anyway. And what was fascinating about Bitches Brew, for me, was that in the studio, I could see he didn't know what he really wanted, but he really knew what he didn't want. And that was great to see the artist in action,
Yeah.
shaping us, telling us, directing us, don't play this, you know, play less.
Yeah,
Or just like this, or go to the drum, you say, you know.
yeah.
And this, I learned more from Miles than I think I did from anyone.
Yeah.
About how to run a band, how to get the most out of your musicians. Because he was master at that, at getting things out of. He got things out of me on the very first recording I had no idea I could do, in a silent way.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely amazed me. And I saw him do it many times to all the different players. It was amazing. That's like a, what can you say, genius?
Oh yeah. You have also jammed and recorded with Jimi Hendrix, and I wondered, what is the greatest memory you have from that period, flying south?
Well, I think, no, first of all, Jimmy was just a beautiful, lovely, sweet person, and absolutely unpretentious, which is actually my experience with all the great players, Miles too. Very simple, no pretension. It's the mediocre players who kind of like, you know, moody and silly. And Jimmy was that. He was delightful. Just a so nice person. But I would put Jimmy on a very high position. Now, it's clear that he was not the musician of John Coltrane's level, for example. But on another aspect of music, they had a great deal in common. That certainly influenced me and millions of other players, because what Jimmy did to the guitar was revolutionary. I think he was held by Eric Clapton. I think Eric did fantastic work in the 60s with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and subsequently with my old pals Jack and Ginger with Cream. And Jimmy, I think that had an impact on him, but then he took it to a different level. And I really adore Jimmy. I think he did marvelous things. He had such an impact on me, because already long before, actually, years before, I heard either Eric or Jimmy. I didn't like this cool jazz guitar sound. For me, it was too cool. It was so cool. It was a bit cold. It missed the thing. And I've been listening to Coltrane and Miles, and of course the sheer passion of those players. And Coltrane, particularly when in 1964-65, when he brought out Love Supreme, and he's starting to play more than one note on the saxophone. Some of his notes, you can hear a chord almost. It's like distorted. And Jimmy took this distortion in a fantastic way, marvelous way. And so he had, I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't be who I am, how I play without Jimmy, but I wouldn't be who I am without B.B. King either. You know, I mean, there's so many, I have so many debts to so many people. And Muddy Waters, when I was 11 years old, Muddy Waters and his slide acoustic guitar playing and his singing. Jimmy took Muddy Waters' singing down. He used to sing like Muddy. That's one other thing I loved about Jimmy, is that he brought that whole Muddy Waters style of singing, which is early 50s. You know, got my mojo work. Jimmy had that. He had that, plus he had the guitar. He had it all. And I got to know him because, of course, an old Mitch Mitchell, who was in the Experience. You know, Mitch Mitchell was a blue flame, as was I with Georgie Fame in the early 60s. So Mitch and I, we went back, and it was through Mitch that I got to meet Jimmy, of course. So I have only marvelous things and thanks to say about Jimmy, because he changed me, he helped me find my way through, because it's very difficult, and particularly in those days, the jazz guitar way was very kind of, you know, Wes Montgomery and Jimmy Rainey and thing, which is a great school. It's like, look what Pat's done with it, Pat Metheny. He's taken that to the nth degree. And it's marvelous musically, but it wasn't. I wanted to hear more R&B. I wanted to hear more blues, and that's why I love Miles. Miles always played the blues. Coltrane also, but they had fantastic techniques, and they were marvelous musicians. They were master musicians. They could play anything, and really that was the yardstick. So yes, Jimmy, he wouldn't be able to play Giant Steps from Coltrane, but who cares?
No, I agree.
You know, listen to him play Hey Joe. Isn't it great? And that's it. If it's great, it's great.
Yeah.
And who cares whether it's like this or whether it's like that?
Do you play that song together?
It's the purists who care, and they are the bane of the world.
Did you ever play Hey Joe with Hendrix?
No, I didn't know. No, the only jam I had with him, I had this big acoustic guitar, which was unplayable because the volume. I walked in after a gig at the Village Vanguard with Mitch, who'd come to see us. And, I mean, I walked in the studio and it was like hallucinating loud. You know, and I was playing this Gibson Hummingbird. You know what a hummingbird is? It's a round hole. With the arm, I plugged it in, I mean, and my guitar just freaked out, almost exploded. And I couldn't play it. It was impossible to play. I should have had a solid body guitar.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I tried. But it was a party. There was not too much going on except a lot of partying, you know. Lots of guys and girls and playing, and that's what it was, you know.
Yeah.
But it was great fun. And I got to meet, actually, that's where I met Buddy Miles for the first time. I think this was almost the point of transition, Jimmy's transition from the Experience to the Band of Gypsies, because Buddy was in there, and I actually got very friendly with. He was a very dear friend, Buddy Miles. We became really tight, and he was on the first recording I did with Douglas Records in 1970, and he had some boogaloo that was just amazing. What a drummer! And so of course, then I got to see Jimmy play with Buddy, you know, with the Band of Gypsies at the Garden, Madison Square Garden one night.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And Peter, just you're sitting on a sidewalk cafe, enjoying your breakfast, and there is a little dog coming over to your table, and it sits down and it won't move, and it starts to sing. What would you do?
Listen.
Of course.
I mean, if it's a singing dog, well, of course I'm going to listen. Wow, man, sing.
And John, your latest album, Blacklight, a beautiful, beautiful composition of work. Tell me about the direction we're going.
Well, the direction, you know, I never know really how the direction's going to be, because I can't sit down and write music, Chris. It doesn't work like that. I wait, and if music comes, then it comes. I have to be ready at all times, which is why I've got my iPhone, it's in my jacket, and I've got this little recorder, and I get an idea, I would sing it immediately, or if I have a piece of paper, and I'm in a plane, I'll write it down, and because the ideas, they come and they go like fog, like mist. When the ideas for this album began coming, the ideas themselves have directions. They have built-in instructions, you know, in the sense that they communicate which form they want to take.
Mm.
Because there are ideas that come that are distinctly Shakti pieces, or distinctly pieces for Pakwanai. Which reminds me, incidentally, there's one piece on the album called El Hombre que Sabía, which was for Paco, the man who knew. And this, in 2013, Paco and I, we were talking about recording last year, which would have been next year in 2013, and already music had come to me. I have a number of pieces already at home that came to me that were for Paco and I. That's what I mean. When the music comes, it has a specific form. It tells me what form it wants, and this music was. And I told Paco, I said, you know, I've got music coming. He said, yeah, me too. I said, let's see what we have, and because we toured together as a duo in the 90s, and no, in the 80s, sorry, and so we said, let's see what we have together, and if we have enough songs, then we'll record a duo album next year, which would have been last year, 2014. And this tune, that El Hombre que Sabía, which didn't have a title in those days, it just was the piece. I sent it to him, and he really liked this piece. He was very happy with this piece, and I spoke to him just before he left for Mexico, which was where he passed away, and he said, he told me how much he liked this piece. And so when it came to the recording, I felt I had to do something, get the band to play it in a way that he would enjoy. So we did. But generally the other pieces, they came with the instructions that are similar to a concept that began 10 years ago with an album called Industrial Zen, which I don't know if you're familiar with. In Industrial Zen, there are movements in the pieces, and that have different dynamic, and there are even voices. There's poetry in it, but in this recording, these pauses, breaks became doorways to another view inside the music. And so I'm basically just following instructions, for want of another word. So I'm hearing things in my head that I say, oh, okay, then the music goes here, then there's a break here, and there's a pause, but it's not a pause. It's a door or a portal into another view of what's inside the music. It's very difficult to explain in words, Chris.
It was beautiful.
But anyway, that's how the music came out, and it took a lot of time to realize what these portals, how to bring into reality these portals. I don't know how else to explain to you.
No, it's fantastic.
But,
I absolutely follow, and thank you so much.
But this is. But if I don't have anything in the head, I can't do anything. It's terrible.
Of course.
So I just wait.
Of course.
And at the moment, I don't have anything. Actually, no, I got something the other day, an interesting idea, but it was a rhythmic idea. But I mean, you know, I'll probably have to wait a while before. You know, but then you never know.
Yeah.
You never know, is the music going to come or is it not? Because if it doesn't, then that's it.
Of course.
It's over.
Of course.
You know, what am I going to do? If there's no more new music, you know, that's it.
And
but whatever.
of course.
Whatever is fine.
Of course. And John, some very quick questions at the end. Tiger, elephant, or eagle?
What about them? Do I like them?
What's your favorite?
Elephant.
Fish, steak, or salad?
Salad.
Golf, tennis, or Formula One?
Tennis.
Shoes, slippers, or barefoot?
Barefoot.
John, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, the fantastic
Thank you.
John McLaughlin. Thank you, John.
You're very kind, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
So it's John's dedicated juice, and in this case I called it the delicate dimension.
Fusion.
Fusion. Mm. Signing of the apron, Joe. So this is the new.
Tommy Emmanuel.
Yes. So we had the pleasure of him listening
When
to.
did you see him?
That was
Recently?
in the 15th of September in in Los Angeles. So we did that.
It's funny because he's been playing with this trio of guitars.
Yes.
You know about them? And I just got called 3 days ago by a friend that he's leaving the group. They're Serbian, I think, the other players.
Yes.
He's leaving the group, and the group are looking for another guitar player, and in that kind of style.
Yeah.
And kind of like, so I've got my friends looking in America. Should I sign here?
Yes. In large letters. Now the only trio I follow is the most beautiful trio. You may have heard of it. From Paco de Lucia, Al Di Meola, and John McLaughlin.
Yes, it was a good one.